Okay, in this tutorial, we're going to look at how we can take some keyframe animation and drive that by simply placing markers in the timeline here. You might notice as the playhead's moving across here, each time it hits a marker, it's triggering our animation. We're going to set this up via an animation control, some basic keyframe animation, and then we've got some blend shapes. Pretty much everything here is available in the starter version of Cavalry. The only thing that is a pro feature is the timeline counter itself, but everything building up to that I hope you'll still find useful. If you do want to follow along with this, you can grab the scene file from scenery.io. If you've not discovered it yet, it's a great resource. Lots of Cavalry artists are being very generous and uploading all of their own scene files so that you can download them and have a look at yourself. If you want to grab this one, just click it and then click the download button here and that will download the .cv file. Okay, so let's get into it. I've got a scene, sort of blank scene ready to go here. I've just done things like I've set the background color to this kind of gray, and the first thing we need to do is create our face. So I didn't actually use an ellipse for that. It was actually a rounded rectangle. So I'm just going to hold Option Alt to click and create that rectangle. I have a palette of colors ready to go here, so I'm just going to click this yellow to set that. And then the size I wanted for this was 230. I'm just going to hold Option or Alt as I hit enter, and that will set both of these values. And then I actually did this with corner rounding, and I think it was just over 100 I needed to get the right kind of look. So yeah, that's looking good. The next thing is, let's start with one of the eyes. So again, Option Alt, click, this time on the ellipse tool. That has been set to the yellow color again, so let's set that to a white. And then for this, I wanted this at 34 by 34. And then let's set the position for this. I think for this it was something like 45, 32. Yeah, looks good. Okay, and now let's make the pupil. We've got the right color set there for this. This one was 24 by 24. And then we can just move this into position. Okay, let's start giving these some names. So we're just going to hit enter and give these some names. Eye right, and we'll call this pupil right. Okay, if we go back into this original scene, you'll notice that as this moves through, the pupil is being occluded. Well, there's obviously a heart at this point, but is being occluded by the eyeball itself. And the way you do that is you create a clipping mask. And so what we can do here is we can say, right, make the pupil masked by the eye. So to do that, I'm going to drag a connection from here, drop it on, choose clipping mask, connect to new. Now, by default, that will turn our eye off. We don't want that here. We can turn this on. But now, when we move our eye through, you can see that it's being occluded. So this is the setup that we need to get that working. The next thing we can do is we can actually make the pupil a child of the eye. So I'm going to drag this on top of the eye like that. And you might be thinking, well, how come if that's below the eye, why is it rendering on top of the eye? And the reason for that is a setting here. So by default, draw on top of parent is checked, and for this reason, really. If you want to change that behavior, you can always turn this off, and then it will respect the hierarchy as normal. Okay, so let's just get this positioned. So I think we can zero that out. And actually, it was just slightly cross-eyed, this one. So let's just pull that in just a touch there. Okay, so now they are parented to each other. Whenever we move the eye now, the pupil's going to move with it. So let's start doing some animation. So let's keyframe both X and Y. And we'll just move to a frame. It really doesn't matter which frame you put this on, but we're going to move this up and out a little bit. And I know the values that I need for this, so I'm going to type in 60 and then 77, and so that's now moving up there. And we want to do the same then if we go back to our original, you can see the pupils kind of, they go even further cross-eyed and move across like that. So let's set that animation up as well. So I'm going to optional right click to load this in. And again, we're going to set keyframes here. And I'm just going to make sure that they're on the same frame. And we're going to go across like this. Just make sure that's actually sort of disappeared will be good enough. And then we also just need to sort of, we're going to come down a little bit so it moves down to through the eye as we move up. So I think -40 was the number that worked for me. Yeah, so you kind of, it feels like it's staying in position almost, going against the motion of the pupil itself. Great, okay, so we're nearly there with that eye. One thing we need to do now is we need to set up the blend shape. So the eye sort of morphs. If you watch the whites here, it moves into this heart shape. We'll go back here. Now I've put a little guide in here for this tutorial for our heart shape. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on the grid, and I'm also going to turn on snapping, and I'm just going to make sure that grid snapping is enabled. And I'm going to, with the pen tool, I'm going to start to draw our shape. I'm going to drag a point out here, click again, drag a point here, click again. And then onto the edit shape tool, I'm just going to hold Option Alt to convert this into a Bezier, and then hold Option Alt again to break these handles. And then here we can start to just move these until they're in a position that we like. Yeah, that's close enough. So let's just give this the name Heart. And let's just hide our guide. Okay, so what we want to do now is we want to blend between this eye and our heart shape. Now it doesn't really matter where the heart is in terms of position. The feature we're going to use next is more concerned about the meshes themselves rather than their positions. So what we're going to create here is a layer called a blend shape. So I'm just hitting Command or Control full stop to bring up the quick add window and just double click. And what we can do is the blend shape will take an input shape. So in this case, let's put our heart as the input shape. And then to make a connection from the blend shape itself, from the ID, come across and drag that onto the deformers here. Now you can see that's already working. And as I just change the strength, we're blending between those two things. Now a couple of little things just to check as you're working with blend shapes is that it's quite important about where let's just turn the grid off. And in fact, let's just turn this right down so we can see this a little more clearly. There's a tiny small arrow here, and that just indicates that this is the first point, and that is the direction of this shape. And if we do the same on here, you'll see that we've got the same place. So blend shape relies on, well, path direction is less critical, but obviously it makes sense for the path directions to be in the same direction. But what is important is that we've got the same point count. So we've got 4 points here, and we've got 4 points on our heart. And so now the blend shape will blend between. Great, okay, so we don't really need our heart now, that's doing its job. We can turn that off. And we can just set some keyframes for our blend shape. So we're going to start on 0, and as we go up, we're going to 100. Let's just turn our pupil back on and our face back on. So what you will notice is that this now seems at a bit of a strange angle compared to this one. And all we need to do is add some rotation to this eye. So if we start at 0, again, making sure our keyframes are matching up. And we want to be, I think it was -12. Yeah, that looks good. Great, so the next thing is we want to deal with this color change. Now, we could just simply animate the color. So this fill color, we could make some keyframes here and animate that. But I'm going to use another utility here called, again, blend, this time called a color blend. So what we can do here is we can take our start color. In this case, we want that to be white. And then our last color wants to be our pink. So we can drag our swatch in over here. And we can then make a connection from that again onto our eye right. And we're going to go to fill color. And now we can go from white to that pink. So again, let's set the keyframes for that. So we're going to go from there and then to 100%. And if I just play this back, you'll see that that's starting to work. Now we're not too worried about any easings or anything like that at this point in time. That can come a bit later on. Now, before we duplicate this eye so we can make our left eye as well, let's do some rigging so that we don't have to repeat it again on the left eye. So I mentioned at the beginning of this tutorial that we're using a feature called the animation control. And just to create that, we can either go up to the shelf here and click this button, or again, we can use the quick add and just search for animation control. And what animation control does is it will basically allow you to interpolate between keyframes. Now in this case, we've only got 2 keyframes, but if you had 8 keyframes, you could also use the animation control in the same way. And all we need to do is basically make a connection from the animation control on to anything that's animating here. And what you'll notice is when that happens, the keyframe icon changes to this little dash, and that just tells you that you have an animation control connected and that it is active. So we can turn this off and you can see our keyframe appears again. Now, what you can see is I've only put this against one of those animations, so it's not really making a lot of sense just yet, but you can see that we're able to interpolate between those 2 keyframes. So let's make these connections to everything else. So we'll do our position Y, rotation Z, and then for the other one as well. And now when we do this, we've got our entire animation all hooked up to one controller. So now we can duplicate our eye right. So I'm just going to hit Command or Control and D. So let's just give this a name. And now we just need to reposition these. So this wants to be -45. That Y can stay. And this wants to be 3. And then as we go to the other end, sorry, we need to turn our animation control off. We need to set this to -60. This needs to be 12. And what have I forgotten? The pupil. The pupil needs to go the other way. Have I got that right? Yeah. Okay, perfect. So now if I turn the animation control back on, we've got control of all of those, and that's working really nicely. So let's turn this animation control back off again, back to our start frame, and we can start thinking about the mouth. So I'm going to zoom in, put the grid back on again, and then using the pen tool, I'm just going to click a point, drag a point like this, and then click another one, hit return. This creates our editable shape. So let's call this, I'm actually going to call this teeth because it becomes the teeth. And then if we set the stroke color, I'm going to pump this up a bit. Let's call this 12. And let's set the cap style to round as well. And then to animate this, we're going to use a feature called path animation. There's a couple of ways you can set this up. On the shape tab here, we have a path attribute, and you can click this keyframe button. The other way to do it is just in the scene window here, and this will do exactly the same thing, but by clicking this, we've created a keyframe for our path itself. And then we can move through, and then we can move all of our points so that they're up into the right place. So let's just start by moving that so it's flat, and then we can drag all of them and let's say it's there. And then I think for this, we just want to go a little bit wider as well, as we do, to give it that smile. So now you can see that that's happening. Let's just hook our animation control up with that straight away. And we need to do this over into the attribute editor over here. Okay, that's working. And so the next thing to do, let's go the other way around. Let's start here and let's draw our other mouth shape. So we're going to start here. I think it was down here somewhere maybe. We can always go back and change this later. And I'm just going to go a little bit, yeah, more like that. And then, so with this one, we don't want the stroke. We want the fill color. It's this pink that we want here. And again, we want to set some path animation keyframes for this one. So we're going to go from there all the way back to the beginning. And then all we need to do here is just get this pretty close into this shape here. And then what we can do is we're missing a point here that we need, so I can hold S, and that will just split the path at that point when I click, and then we can drag that down there as well. Now it doesn't matter that that's not perfect because it's hiding behind the mouth there, but you can see that that's now working. Now one thing we need to do is obviously animate the color for the teeth themselves. Now, in fact, let's just give this a quick name. We could use another color blend for this, but let's go the sort of long way around on this one, and let's set some keyframes for our RGB. In fact, I've set those in the wrong place. They need to be at the beginning. And then we can just take the color, change that to white. And now as we go through, you can see that's working. Now, again, we need to set up our keyframe animation. Our animation control. So let's take some keys and connect them all. Oh, what have I done? Oh, it is working. It's just because it wasn't active. We can put that in there, and then we actually need to make that connection across. We've already done that. Nope, I'm looking for the mouth. Okay. So now if we turn the animation control on, which it is, we've got all of these being controlled by that one attribute. So let's just do a little bit of tidy up. We'll turn off the grid. We don't need that anymore. Let's just close all these down. And then perhaps just drag our animation controller up to the top here. Just before we move on to the timeline counter itself, just to make sure we can see the advantage of using animation control like this, is we can now actually keyframe this. So we could go from 0 to 100 and back to 0 again. And we can now just, if I'm just going to hold Option Alt and drag these keyframes across, we've now got that entire animation under this one attribute. So we've got far more control over it without having to worry about duplicating all the keyframes that are hiding under here. But what the timeline counter allows you to do is basically control the strength of the animation control by using markers within the timeline itself. So let's create a timeline counter. And there are a couple of modes here. We can be triggered by the markers themselves. We've also got beat markers that they can be triggered by. And then we'll just touch on some of these other features as we put this together. But all the timeline counter does is every time it hits a marker, this count is going to go from 0 to 1. So if I create a marker in here, we can do this by right-clicking Add Time Marker. The shortcut for that is Command *, which on a regular keyboard is Shift, Command or Control and number 8. And so we have our keyframe in there now. Our marker in there now. And if I just press play, this will be very, very subtle. Just watch this over here. You see that just changed to 1. Now, the mode on this is accumulate. So if we made another marker, you'll see that that number is now 2. So we're going 1, 2. We don't actually want that mode for this one. We want this to be on a trigger. And the difference here, this will be really hard to spot, but as we go across it, it just flicks from 0 to 1, literally on that frame for this. And we can adjust that. So what we need to do is we can use this value to drive the animation control here. So I'm going to take a connection from the timeline counter onto the amount here. Now, what you'll notice is that that's all very well, but the count goes from 0 to 1, whereas the amount on the animation control goes from 0 to 100. So we can add a little expression in here. So if I go right click, add expression, and we can literally go times 100. And now you can see that on that marker, the animation control is at 100, and when it's not, it's on 0. Now at the moment, that happens in an instant. And we obviously don't want that for this example here. And that's where these convolution settings come in. So if I extend this, I'm going to say 30, and then hit play, you should see this climb up and then drop back down again, climb up and then drop back down again when it hits those markers. And we can also shape this. So if we watch the speed on this one, you'll see it kind of goes up and then pauses and then just drops back down again. And we can use the, we can use the graph here to do that. So I'm going to double click to add an extra point and drag this up here. Let's just flatten this out a bit. And just move this across. And now we should get something a bit more similar to what we had previously. And then we can also do things like, we can just bring this back in time. You can see that this is already almost completed here because of what we did with the graph there. But we can actually just come backwards in time so that actually this only happens on the marker itself. There we go. And so I think we can probably just squeeze this in a bit. It feels a tiny bit slow. There we go. But you can play with those settings. And then we can do other things where we could, if I add another marker, or let's drag this one out, add a marker here, and then we give this a different color. We can say filter marker color and only look at the blue markers. And when we hit play now, we'll go blue. When it goes past the yellow, nothing happens. And when it goes past the blue, it happens again. And then just to show you the settings on count, we can go to beat markers instead. And the way you can turn beat markers on is in here. We can sort of change the BPM and various bits and pieces in here. But now we'll see this on every beat. Our entire animation is repeating. So a really nice way to create loops in that sense as well. Anyway, so we've covered quite a lot of ground in there, touched lots of features in Cavalry, but yeah, I hope you found something useful out of that, and yeah, look forward to seeing what you create. Thanks.